The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of the corporate building, lighting up the shiny floors that Samuel had polished just the night before. Samuel, the janitor, had been working in this building for years. He was the kind of man everyone passed by but never really looked at for long. He wore his dark blue uniform, carried his mop and bucket, and worked with quiet dedication. Most employees only noticed him when the floor was so clean it reflected their faces, or when the trash bins never seemed to overflow. Yet Samuel never complained. He was proud of the work he did, no matter how invisible it seemed to others. This morning, like all others, he greeted people as they hurried past. "Good morning," he would say, even if they didn't answer back. Some would nod, others would smile politely, and some would not notice him at all. But Samuel didn't take offense. He believed kindness never went to waste, even if it wasn't returned. He was sweeping the lobby near the elevators when a small, unexpected voice caught his attention. "Excuse me," it said softly. Samuel turned his head and saw a little girl standing a few feet away. She was no more than 6 or 7 years old, dressed in a simple pink dress with a matching hair ribbon. Her big brown eyes looked up at him with both curiosity and innocence. Samuel smiled warmly. "Hello there," he said, leaning slightly on his broom. "Are you lost, little one?" The girl shook her head. "No, I'm waiting for my mommy. She works here." She fidgeted with her ribbon, then looked around the lobby, as though searching for someone. After a moment, her gaze returned to Samuel, and she tilted her head. Her voice was small but clear as she asked, "Are you my new daddy?" The words dropped into the air like a stone into still water, creating ripples that touched everyone nearby. The two receptionists at the front desk froze mid-conversation, their eyes widening. A man who was checking his watch by the elevator looked up sharply. And just a few steps away, Mr. Anderson, the CEO of the company, stopped in his tracks, stunned by what he had just heard. Samuel blinked, his broom nearly slipping from his hands. He had not expected such a question, not from a child he had never met before. His lips parted, but no words came out. He simply stared at her, speechless, unsure what to say. He wanted to laugh it off, to gently correct her, but something in the girl's innocent face stopped him. She wasn't joking. She was asking with the sincerity only a child could have. The silence stretched, and the CEO's sharp eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the janitor. Mr. Anderson was a man who rarely paid attention to those outside his circle of executives. He was tall, commanding, always in a crisp suit that spoke of power and wealth. But in that moment, watching the little girl and the janitor locked in an unexpected moment, even he felt something stir inside him. Samuel cleared his throat softly, finally managing a whisper. I'm not your daddy, sweetheart." The girl pouted, her eyebrows drawing together. "But you're nice. Mommy says nice men are rare. You always smile when we come in, and you held the door last time. I thought maybe you could be." The receptionists exchanged looks, their hearts melting despite themselves. Mr. Anderson crossed his arms, intrigued. For reasons he could not explain, he did not walk away. Instead, he stayed to watch, as though the answer to this child's question was more important than his next meeting. Samuel's chest tightened. He knelt down so that he was at eye level with her. "What's your name, little one?" he asked softly. "Emily," she replied quickly, her voice confident now. "And my mommy's Grace. She works upstairs in the accounting department." "Emily," Samuel repeated gently, nodding. "That's a beautiful name." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Emily, I don't know if I can be your daddy. But I can be your friend, if you'd like." The girl's eyes lit up as if he had just offered her the world. "Really?" she asked, her smile wide. "Really," Samuel assured her, his voice warm. At that moment, Grace appeared at the far end of the lobby, rushing toward them with worry etched on her face. She had clearly just realized her daughter had wandered off. "Emily," she called, her voice trembling with both fear and relief. "There you are." Emily ran into her mother's arms. "Mommy, I found a new friend. His name is Samuel." Grace looked up at the janitor with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, sir. I hope she didn't bother you." Samuel stood slowly, shaking his head. "Not at all, ma'am. She's a very sweet little girl." Grace offered him a tired smile, one that carried the weight of long hours and hidden struggles. "Thank you," she whispered, before guiding Emily toward the elevator. The lobby returned to its usual rhythm, but the moment lingered in the air. The receptionists resumed their work, though they glanced curiously at Samuel now and then. The man by the elevator shook his head in amusement, but Mr. Anderson did not move immediately. He stood silently, his eyes fixed on the janitor, deep in thought. For the first time in years, the CEO felt something stir within him, something human, something personal. The simple question of a child had peeled back a layer of his carefully built armor. He saw the janitor not as just a uniform, but as a man who carried himself with quiet dignity, who had touched a child's heart with nothing more than kindness. Samuel, still holding his broom, felt the weight of what had just happened. He had been asked many things in his life, but never that. The innocence of Emily's words had shaken him more than he cared to admit. He wondered what kind of life Grace and her daughter lived, what had made Emily ask such a question so openly. He pushed the thought aside and returned to his sweeping, though his mind was far away. Mr. Anderson finally turned and walked toward the elevators. But his mind was not on his meeting anymore. Instead, he replayed the moment over and over again, the little girl's voice, the janitor's stunned silence, the truth hidden behind such a simple question. He didn't know why, but he felt certain that this was not the end of the story. And so the morning continued, with the building humming with its usual noise, yet something invisible had shifted. A janitor, a little girl, her weary mother, and a CEO all bound together by an innocent question that none of them would soon forget. The next morning came quietly, with the sun rising over the city and casting a golden glow on the tall buildings. Grace held Emily's hand as they entered the company lobby. Grace's face showed tiredness from the late night before. She had been working on reports for hours after putting Emily to bed. Raising a child alone while handling her job was never easy, but she kept going because she had no choice. Emily, on the other hand, was full of energy, skipping slightly as they walked. She looked around the lobby with her usual curiosity, searching for the familiar blue uniform of Samuel, the janitor. When she spotted him, she smiled brightly and waved. "Hi, Samuel," she called out cheerfully. Samuel, who had been polishing the side of a glass wall, looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Emily," he greeted warmly. Then his eyes met Grace's, and he gave her a polite nod. "Morning, ma'am." Grace returned the nod with a small smile. She still felt embarrassed about what Emily had said the day before. The innocent words of her daughter had caused a scene, and she worried Samuel might have been uncomfortable. But when she looked at him, she saw no trace of annoyance or discomfort, only the same calm kindness that always seemed to surround him. As they waited for the elevator, Emily tugged at her mother's hand. "Mommy, can Samuel come with us upstairs?" she asked loudly. Grace's cheeks turned red. "Sweetheart, Samuel works here. He can't just leave his job." She leaned down and whispered gently, "Don't trouble him, okay?" Emily pouted but nodded reluctantly. When the elevator arrived, she waved at Samuel again. "Bye, Samuel. See you later." Samuel chuckled softly. "See you later, Emily." The elevator doors closed, and the lobby returned to its usual rhythm. Yet Samuel's thoughts lingered. He couldn't stop thinking about the little girl's question from the day before. "Are you my new daddy?" The words still echoed in his mind. He had been caught off guard then, but now, after thinking it over, he understood that the question revealed something deeper, perhaps loneliness, perhaps hope. Grace, meanwhile, carried the weight of her life silently. She had been working at the company for 3 years, always staying late to finish tasks. She rarely spoke about her personal life, but everyone knew she was a single mother. Some colleagues admired her dedication, while others gossiped behind her back. Grace ignored the whispers, focusing only on her daughter and her work. But inside, she often felt stretched thin, trying to be both a good employee and a loving mother. During lunch, Grace sat alone at her desk, eating a small sandwich while typing on her computer. She glanced at a framed photo of Emily, her only source of strength. She remembered the look on Samuel's face when Emily had asked that innocent question. There had been no anger in his eyes, only surprise and a quiet gentleness. That image comforted her, even though she tried not to think too much about it. Later that afternoon, Grace rushed to finish her reports when her phone buzzed. It was the school. Emily's teacher explained that Grace had forgotten to sign a form and that Emily would need to be picked up earlier the next day. Grace sighed heavily. She couldn't afford to leave work early again. Her manager had already warned her about her distractions. That evening, as Grace and Emily left the building, Emily once again ran to Samuel, who was cleaning near the entrance. "Samuel, look," she exclaimed, holding up a drawing she had made in daycare. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands: a little girl, a woman, and a tall man with a big smile. Samuel crouched down and studied the drawing carefully. "That's beautiful, Emily. Is this your family?" Emily nodded proudly. "That's me, that's Mommy, and that's," she paused, then whispered, "maybe you." Grace quickly stepped forward, gently pulling Emily back. "Emily, that's enough," she said firmly, though her voice was soft. She turned to Samuel, her eyes apologetic. "I'm so sorry. She's just a child. She doesn't understand." Samuel stood slowly, his expression calm. "It's all right, ma'am. She's a sweet girl. I don't mind." Grace gave him a faint smile before guiding Emily outside. But her heart felt heavy. She worried her daughter's innocent words might cause misunderstandings, yet deep down, she also felt a quiet gratitude toward Samuel. His presence, his patience, and his kindness had brought comfort to Emily in ways she herself sometimes could not. Unbeknownst to Grace, someone else had noticed the interactions. Mr. Anderson, the CEO, had been watching from a distance. He had passed through the lobby at just the right time to see Emily showing her drawing to Samuel. He didn't understand why he was paying attention to this at all. Usually, he was too focused on numbers, meetings, and deals to notice anything outside his executive circle. But something about the janitor's quiet presence and the little girl's innocent trust pulled at his heart. That night, as Mr. Anderson sat in his luxurious office overlooking the city, he thought about his own childhood. His father had left when he was very young, leaving his mother to struggle alone. He remembered the pain of watching her work tirelessly, the emptiness of not having a father figure around. Emily's question, and Samuel's stunned silence, had awakened something in him he thought he had buried long ago. Meanwhile, Samuel returned to his small apartment. It was a modest space with simple furniture, but it was clean and orderly, just like his nature. He sat by the window, sipping a cup of tea, and thought about Emily. He wondered what her life was like, growing up without a father. He knew the ache of absence well. Years ago, Samuel had dreamed of building a family of his own, but life had taken a different path. His mother had fallen ill, and he had sacrificed his own ambitions to care for her until her final days. Since then, he had lived quietly, finding small joys in simple acts of kindness. For Samuel, being asked such a question by Emily had touched something deep in his heart. It reminded him of the family he once hoped to have, of the love he still carried quietly inside. He knew he couldn't answer Emily's question the way she wanted, but he also knew he couldn't ignore the bond that was forming between them. The next day, Samuel arrived at work earlier than usual. As he cleaned the lobby, he found himself glancing toward the entrance, almost as if he were waiting. And when Grace and Emily finally walked in, he felt a warmth spread through him as Emily rushed forward with a bright smile. "Good morning, Samuel." Grace smiled politely, her eyes tired but kind. Samuel nodded to her respectfully before returning the greeting to Emily. He realized then that sometimes life gave unexpected connections, and even if he didn't fully understand where this one was leading, he felt grateful for it. And in the shadows of the lobby, Mr. Anderson watched once again, quietly studying the janitor who seemed to carry more dignity than many of his well-dressed executives. The days began to pass in a quiet rhythm, and with each passing morning Emily's excitement to see Samuel grew stronger. She no longer walked calmly beside her mother into the lobby. Instead, she hurried forward, her little shoes tapping loudly on the shiny floor as she searched for him. The moment she saw his blue uniform, her face would light up, and her small hand would wave eagerly. "Samuel," she would call, her voice carrying across the lobby. And Samuel, no matter how busy he was, would always stop for her. Sometimes he would bend down and show her the tools he used to clean, letting her hold the handle of his mop for a second while she giggled. Other times, he would tell her short stories from his own childhood, like how he once made a kite from old newspapers or how he learned to fix broken toys with nothing but glue and patience. Emily listened with wide eyes, fascinated. To her, Samuel was not just the janitor everyone else passed by, he was a friend, someone who paid attention to her when others were always rushing. Grace noticed the bond forming, and though part of her worried, another part of her felt quietly thankful. For so long, Emily had lacked a gentle, fatherly presence in her life. Grace had tried to fill every role, but it wasn't the same. She worked hard, cooked meals, helped with homework, and comforted Emily through nightmares, yet she could not replace the feeling of having someone steady and strong to lean on. When she saw her daughter smiling up at Samuel, her heart softened, even if her mind reminded her to be careful. One late afternoon, Grace was called into a meeting that stretched longer than expected. Emily sat in the lobby, waiting patiently with her coloring book. Samuel, who was nearby wiping down the glass doors, noticed her sitting alone. He quietly walked over and sat down on a bench a few feet away, giving her space but keeping her company. "What are you drawing today?" he asked kindly. Emily held up the page. "It's a castle. But I don't know how to draw a flag on top." Samuel smiled. "Here, let me show you a trick." He picked up a crayon she offered and drew a simple little flag waving in the wind. Emily clapped her hands happily. "You're really good at this." He chuckled. "Not really. I just practiced a lot when I was your age. My mom used to say practice makes perfect." The mention of his mother brought a soft shadow to his eyes, but he quickly masked it with another smile. Emily, however, noticed. Children often saw emotions adults tried to hide. "Do you miss your mommy?" she asked innocently. Samuel paused for a moment, his gaze distant. "Yes," he admitted softly. "I miss her very much. She was a kind woman." Emily leaned closer and whispered, "I miss my daddy too. But mommy says he had to go far away." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Samuel felt a connection deeper than words. He saw in Emily's small face the same longing he had carried in his own heart for years, the longing for someone who was no longer there. He reached out and gently patted her shoulder. "Sometimes people leave, but the love we feel for them stays with us forever. That love makes us strong." Emily nodded thoughtfully, as though his words made perfect sense to her young mind. Grace arrived a little later, breathless from her meeting. When she saw Emily sitting peacefully with Samuel, showing him her finished drawing, she felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. She thanked him quietly, and he only nodded, saying, "She's a wonderful kid." That night, as Grace tucked Emily into bed, Emily whispered, "Mommy, Samuel said love makes us strong. Is that true?" Grace looked into her daughter's hopeful eyes and smiled softly. Yes, darling. It's very true. Meanwhile, upstairs in his spacious office, Mr. Anderson had noticed everything. He had been passing through the lobby earlier and had stopped when he saw Samuel sitting with Emily. The sight of the janitor taking time to comfort the little girl stirred something in him once again. He remembered his own mother struggling to keep their lives together after his father disappeared. He remembered being Emily's age and wishing for someone to sit with him, to explain life's hardships in simple words. He had grown up too fast, his heart hardening as he climbed the corporate ladder, but now those walls began to crack. The next morning, Mr. Anderson did something unusual. He approached Samuel as he was mopping near the entrance. "Good morning," the CEO said in his deep voice. Samuel looked up, startled. Rarely did the CEO address him directly. "Good morning, sir," he replied respectfully. For a moment, Mr. Anderson said nothing, simply observing the man. Then he asked, "How long have you been working here?" "Almost 10 years, sir," Samuel answered calmly. "That long?" Mr. Anderson mused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet, I've only just started noticing you." He paused before adding quietly, "That little girl seems to like you very much." Samuel felt a nervous flutter in his chest. "She's a sweet child. Children need kindness." Mr. Anderson nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving Samuel to wonder what that brief conversation meant. Later that week, Emily bounded into the lobby once again, carrying a toy with a broken wheel. "Samuel, can you fix this?" she pleaded, holding up her little car. Samuel examined it carefully. I think I can. But it'll take a little glue and patience." He took the toy home that night, repaired it with care, and returned it to her the next day. When Emily saw the wheel turning smoothly again, she squealed with delight. "Thank you, Samuel. You're the best." Grace watched the exchange with mixed emotions. She knew her daughter was growing attached, and she worried about what that might mean. But when she saw Emily's joy and Samuel's quiet smile, she couldn't bring herself to stop it. That evening, as Samuel walked home, he thought about how his life had once been filled with dreams he never chased. He had wanted to study further, to start a small business, maybe even to have a family of his own. But life had taken him on a different road. He had cared for his mother until her final breath, then taken the janitor's job to survive. And yet, despite the simplicity of his life, he felt a new sense of purpose now. Emily's trust, Grace's quiet gratitude, and even the CEO's curious glances made him feel as though something important was unfolding, though he couldn't see where it was leading. Back in his office, Mr. Anderson leaned against the window, staring at the city lights. His thoughts kept returning to Samuel. He wondered how a man with so little could carry himself with such dignity. He also wondered if he had been blind all these years, too focused on wealth and status to see the true value of character. And when he thought of Emily's words, "Are you my new daddy?" he realized the question had not just been for Samuel. In some way, it had been for everyone who had forgotten what it meant to be present, to care, to love. And so, the bond between the janitor and the little girl grew stronger each day, silently watched by her mother and quietly noted by the CEO. None of them knew yet how deeply that simple bond would change all of their lives. The day started like any other, with employees rushing into the tall building, their shoes clicking against the shiny floors. Samuel was already at work, carefully wiping down the lobby windows, making sure everything sparkled. Emily spotted him the moment she entered with her mother. She let go of Grace's hand and ran forward, her laughter filling the quiet space. Samuel bent down, steadying her before she could slip on the polished floor. "Careful now," he said with a smile. Emily giggled and held up a small flower she had plucked on the way. "This is for you, Samuel. Mommy said flowers make people happy." Samuel's heart warmed. He accepted the flower as though it were the most precious gift in the world. "It surely does," he said softly. Grace, watching the exchange, felt her chest tighten. She wanted to say something, to tell Emily not to trouble Samuel, but the joy in both their faces stopped her. Sometimes happiness came from the simplest gestures, and she couldn't bring herself to take it away. That evening, something unusual happened. A loud noise echoed through the building just as people were preparing to leave for the day. The smell of burning wires filled the air. Panic spread quickly as employees rushed toward the exits. The security team scrambled to find the source, and someone shouted about a fire starting in the electrical room. Samuel was near the service hallway when he noticed smoke curling from under a door. Without hesitation, he ran toward it. His hands trembled slightly, but his mind stayed calm. He pushed the door open and saw sparks flying from a panel, flames beginning to climb the wall. He quickly grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted nearby and aimed it at the fire. The heat stung his face, and smoke filled his lungs, but he pressed forward, sweeping the extinguisher back and forth until the flames began to die. His uniform was covered in soot, and sweat poured down his face, but he didn't stop until the fire was out. By the time the security team arrived, Samuel had already contained the danger. The building was safe again, thanks to him. People gathered in the lobby, murmuring about the janitor who had stepped in when no one else dared. Grace, holding Emily tightly, looked at Samuel with tears in her eyes. Emily wriggled free and ran to him, hugging his legs. "You're a hero, Samuel," she cried. Samuel knelt, coughing slightly but smiling at her. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. But inside, he knew not everyone would have acted so quickly. He had done it because he cared not just about the building, but about the people inside it. Mr. Anderson arrived shortly after, his face stern but his eyes unusually soft. He walked straight toward Samuel, who stood awkwardly with his extinguisher-stained hands. The CEO studied him in silence for a long moment before speaking. "You saved us a lot of trouble tonight," he said slowly. "More than that, you saved lives." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "I just did my job, sir." But Mr. Anderson shook his head. "No, you did much more than that." His gaze flicked to Grace and Emily standing nearby, then returned to Samuel. "You've shown something I value more than titles or suits. Courage." The next morning, the atmosphere in the building was different. People greeted Samuel with nods and smiles, some even thanking him directly. For years he had blended into the background, unseen, but now they looked at him with respect. Samuel felt strange about the attention, but he accepted it quietly. Later that day, Emily bounded up to him as usual. "Samuel," she whispered, "yesterday when you fought the fire, you looked like a superhero. I told Mommy you should wear a cape." Samuel chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think a cape would look good with this uniform." Grace smiled faintly, her heart swelling with gratitude. She wanted to say more, to thank him properly, but words felt small compared to what he had done. She simply said, "We're lucky you were here." That evening, Mr. Anderson called Samuel into his office, something that had never happened before. Samuel entered nervously, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. The CEO's office was grand, with tall windows overlooking the city, leather chairs and shelves filled with books. Samuel felt out of place, but he stood tall, waiting. "Sit," Mr. Anderson said, gesturing to a chair. Samuel hesitated, then sat, his back straight. The CEO leaned forward, studying him. "I've been watching you, Samuel. Not just yesterday, but before that too. I've seen how you treat people, how you listen, how you care. That little girl looks at you like you're the most important person in the world. And I can see why." Samuel lowered his eyes, unsure what to say. Mr. Anderson continued, his voice softer now. "I built this company by being strong, by never showing weakness. But lately, I've realized strength isn't just about power or money. It's about character. And you, Samuel, have more character than many men I know in higher positions. Samuel's throat tightened. He had never heard such words spoken about him, not by someone like the CEO. I want to give you an opportunity, Mr. Anderson said firmly. Something beyond janitorial work. A position where your dedication and leadership can be put to better use. Samuel looked up, startled. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes, the CEO replied simply. Think about it. You've earned it. When Samuel left the office, his mind was spinning. He had never expected recognition, let alone a chance at something more. For so long, he had accepted his quiet life, believing his time for dreams had passed. Now, suddenly, a door was opening he hadn't even dared to knock on. Grace found him later in the lobby, still thoughtful. Is everything all right? She asked gently. Samuel managed a small smile. Yes. Just, unexpected things happening. Emily tugged at his sleeve. Samuel, are you going to be famous now? He laughed, kneeling beside her. No, Emily. I'll never be famous. But maybe I can try to do more. For people like you and your mommy. Grace felt her cheeks warm at his words. She turned away quickly, but her heart beat faster. She knew her daughter adored Samuel, but she was beginning to realize she felt something too, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. That night, as the city lights glowed outside his window, Samuel thought of his mother, of the sacrifices he had made, and of the child who had asked him the simplest, most powerful question, "Are you my new daddy?" At the time, he had been speechless. But now, as his bond with Grace and Emily grew, and as the CEO himself placed trust in him, Samuel wondered if maybe, just maybe, life was giving him a second chance. The days that followed felt different for Samuel. People who once hurried past him without a glance now paused to greet him. Employees who barely noticed him before now nodded respectfully, some even stopping to thank him for what he had done during the fire. Samuel remained humble, quietly accepting their words, never allowing pride to creep in. But deep inside, he felt something new. He felt seen. Emily, of course, was more excited than anyone. Every morning she would run into the lobby and announce loudly, "This is my friend Samuel. He's the bravest person in the whole building." Everyone who heard her would smile, and Samuel would laugh softly, telling her to keep her voice down, though secretly, her words warmed him more than she could ever know. One evening, Mr. Anderson called Samuel into his office again. The CEO stood by the tall window, hands in his pockets, gazing at the city lights. When Samuel entered, he turned and spoke directly. "I've thought about what I said before," he began. "I want you to take on a new role. I'm offering you a supervisory position. It won't be easy. You'll need to learn new skills, manage people, and take on more responsibility. But I believe you can do it." Samuel blinked, surprised. "Sir, I've only ever been a janitor. I don't know if I'm qualified." Mr. Anderson's eyes softened. "Qualifications can be learned. Integrity cannot. And you have that in abundance." Samuel felt a lump in his throat. For years, he had accepted his place quietly, never expecting more. Now, for the first time, someone believed he was capable of more. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." When Grace heard the news later from Samuel himself, she smiled with genuine happiness. "You deserve this," she said softly. "You've worked so hard for so long. It's about time someone noticed." Emily clapped her hands, jumping up and down. "Does this mean Samuel gets a bigger office? Can I visit?" Samuel chuckled. "Maybe not an office, little one. But I'll have more work to do, so I'll still need your smiles to keep me strong." As weeks passed, Samuel began his new role. It wasn't easy. He had to manage a small team, keep schedules, and handle paperwork he had never seen before. There were moments he doubted himself, but each time, he remembered the words of Emily and Mr. Anderson. He remembered the fire he had put out, the times he had comforted the little girl, and the trust Grace had shown him. Those memories gave him strength. Slowly, he began to succeed. His team respected him, not just because he was their supervisor, but because he treated them with fairness and kindness. Grace watched all of this from a quiet distance. She admired the way Samuel carried himself. He hadn't let the promotion change who he was. He was still the same gentle man who knelt to listen to Emily's stories and who accepted a small flower as though it were priceless. But Grace also began to notice something else. Her own heart was changing. She had lived so long building walls around herself, focusing only on work and her daughter. She had convinced herself she didn't need anyone else. Yet Samuel's presence was slowly teaching her otherwise. He wasn't just kind to Emily, he was kind to her too, in small, thoughtful ways. He always greeted her warmly, always noticed when she looked tired, and sometimes offered quiet encouragement that meant more than he realized. One Friday evening, Grace worked late again. By the time she came downstairs with Emily, the lobby was nearly empty. Samuel was still there, checking over the cleaning schedule for his team. Emily ran ahead, as always, and began chatting with him. Grace walked slower, her thoughts heavy. She stopped a few steps away and watched the two of them together. Emily's laughter rang out as Samuel showed her how to balance a coin on its edge. Grace felt her eyes sting with tears. She realized then that her daughter had already found something she had been missing for so long: a father figure. Samuel glanced up and saw Grace watching. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the city outside seemed to fade. Neither of them spoke, but something unspoken passed between them, something warm, something hopeful. That weekend, Grace invited Samuel to join them for lunch at a small cafe near the park. It was the first time they had spent time together outside the office building. Emily was thrilled, chattering away as they ate sandwiches and watched the pigeons flutter by. Samuel felt nervous at first, unsure if he belonged there, but soon he relaxed. Grace smiled more that afternoon than she had in months. She noticed the way Samuel listened attentively, not just to Emily but to her as well, never interrupting, never judging. As the sun began to set, Emily ran ahead to chase bubbles another child was blowing. Grace turned to Samuel, her voice soft. "You've been so good to her. To both of us. I don't know how to thank you." Samuel shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. Spending time with you both has been a blessing for me. I thought my life was set, quiet and simple. But Emily's question that day, it woke something in me. I'll never forget it." Grace smiled gently, her eyes glistening. "Neither will I." From then on, their bond grew stronger. Samuel was no longer just the janitor or the new supervisor, he was becoming part of their lives. He helped Emily with her school projects, walked with them to the bus stop, and sometimes shared simple meals with them after long days. Grace found herself laughing again, not out of politeness but from genuine joy. She saw in Samuel the kind of man she had once thought no longer existed: steady, patient, and kind. Even Mr. Anderson noticed the change. One evening, he passed by the lobby and saw Samuel holding Emily's hand while Grace walked beside them. For the first time in years, the CEO smiled to himself. He thought about his own mother and how proud she would have been to see him recognize the value of people not for their titles, but for their hearts. As months passed, life settled into a new rhythm. Samuel thrived in his new role, Emily flourished with his presence, and Grace began to believe in the possibility of happiness again. There was no sudden declaration, no dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, they became a family in all but name. One morning, as they stood together in the lobby, Emily looked up at Samuel with her innocent eyes and asked again, "Are you my new daddy?" This time, Samuel didn't look away. He smiled gently, his eyes meeting Grace's. She didn't speak, but the soft smile on her face said everything. Samuel bent down, his voice warm. Maybe not your daddy, Emily. But I'll always be here for you, as long as you'll have me. Emily threw her arms around him, laughing with joy. Grace watched with tears in her eyes, her heart full. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. And so, the story that began with an innocent question ended with an answer not in words alone, but in actions, in kindness, in love quietly blooming where none had expected it. The janitor who once blended into the background had become a man respected at work, cherished by a child, and valued by a woman who had once thought she had to walk her road alone. The building continued its busy rhythm, but within its walls, something more important had happened. A family had begun to form not by chance, but by the strength of compassion, the power of patience, and the courage to open one's heart again.